Good evening, afternoon, night, morning, whenever you find a way to watch this podcast. It's me, Omar from Hardware, and I want to note that Hardware will be dropping Friday morning. We'll be doing an extra bright and early recording with Jackson because that's the only time we can make this work. But hopefully, it's not too late for a preview of Saturday's game. So stay tuned for that. But for now, actually, that Hardware podcast episode will be released before this because I'll be releasing this early next week. But I guess anyway, before that, I'm joined by Alex Scheer of the CSC podcast, and it's been a while since we talked on the podcast. I think it was like January. We are talking about the Cincinnati Chili Bowl
hmm
with my friend Greg, and also AJ was on as well. It's unfortunate he couldn't make it tonight, but hopefully he'll be back on another time. But Alex, thanks for coming on, and how's everything going?
Hey man, no, thank you for having me. Things are going well. Deep in the throes of my all MAC travel schedule this year. I just wrapped up a great game at Infocision Stadium over in Akron, Kent State Akron last night was quite a doozy. But no, I've got five more regular season games left in the course of the next 3 weeks for the Mid American Conference, and then the MAC Championship up in Detroit on December 2nd. And it's hard to believe it's flying by this quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't believe it myself. I mean, yeah, the season gone by quick, and really too quick to be honest. But it's bittersweet because the bowl games, the bowl races start heating up, especially in a conference like the MAC, where everyone's kind of jockeying for position for these bowl games, where there's just not much distance and not a set order in the MAC. Which I mean, that's our discussion today about bowl games. But I mean, I'm glad to hear everything's great. I'm glad to hear you're going to all these weeknight games, especially too, because for Conference USA. I think I'm lucky when it comes relative to Conference USA fans, because I have UTEP and New Mexico State, within a 40 minutes drive within one another, and
Sure.
within 1 hour of where I work. I'm not going to say my home because I went straight from work to New Mexico State, Florida International. But I mean, I'm lucky. But other CUSA fans, it's like one team and that's it. That's your team. You don't have choices. But going on to our discussion, last week the Bahamas Bowl announced that they were moving to Charlotte for this year only, which kind of surprised me because and I'll ask your thoughts about this as well. But I thought that they would go for Miami in terms of FIU Stadium with Ricardo Silva, just kind of still give that vacation type feel. And that's no disrespect to the great people of Charlotte. I've been to Charlotte a couple of times. It's a very booming city, very booming southern city. Just want to clear the air there, but really not as a close imitation of the Bahamas. So I want to know your thoughts on, I guess, where the game moved in. I guess start up with your projection before and whether it changed after for the Bahamas Bowl matchup.
So, I hadn't really first off, I hadn't really looked too much in terms of projections yet. I was waiting until we got past the midpoint of MAC play. Mostly because I think that's when we're starting to see things shake out, right? Central Michigan, they're still in position to try to win the Mid American Conference Championship. We've actually officially, and I'm actually working on my CS scenarios right now, where we've got 8 of the 12 teams are still alive for a conference championship. So it's a few long shots, of course, but I think it's interesting to see how that race is breaking down. That being said, in terms of moving the Bahamas Bowl, I think I'd seen that they said it was what construction. They were doing some overhauling on the island and on the stadium itself. So I think a one-time move obviously is a good decision. Charlotte, I was just as surprised as you were for that being the location. I definitely was expecting, somewhere in Florida, whether it be over at Florida International, like you mentioned, or, maybe even in Miami, do the Orange Bowl as well as doing the Bahamas Bowl. So I was very surprised to see that, but it makes sense, right? Because there's already so many things going on. Florida doesn't want to spread themselves too thin in terms of overlap. Like, sure, you're going to bring in fans regardless, but a lot of these bowl games, especially for a group of 5 schools, people go because those games are cheap. People go because they want to watch football while they're vacationing over Christmas break, right? So I think having that and trying to put so many more games out there, these games want attendance to be high. You're starting to spread things a little bit too thin, and I think that's part of the reason why it's going to be in Charlotte. Also, Charlotte, it's fairly easy to get to. It's not, it's not crazy in terms of, flights. There are plenty of great airports around Charlotte, in that whole Carolinas area. Um, there's just so many opportunities for people to have a different destination, a different vacation experience. Um, and yeah, I mean, I like it. I think it's the right move by the bowl committee and by the bowl game itself to move it. Um, but I know with the Mid American Conference, that was obviously a traditional matchup with the Conference USA. I think you wrote an article about maybe the Sun Belt, getting that shot and that opportunity. And I think that's an interesting one because I'm looking at it right now. The MAC has 6 bowl games that they have a direct affiliation with. The Bahamas Bowl, the Camellia Bowl, the famous Idaho Potato Bowl, the Lending Tree Bowl, Barstool Arizona Bowl, Quick Lane, and then they can also get 2 spots in one of the 5 following: the Duluth Trading Co. Cure Bowl, which I think they're changing that name again. So it's, just all sorts of craziness. The Frisco Bowl, the Myrtle Beach Bowl, New Mexico Bowl, and then the Boca Raton Bowl. I think what I would love to see is there's so many bowl games available for all these conferences. And I think that's a good thing. Um, I don't think you have to replace a MAC school with a Sun Belt team. If you do, more power to you, maybe because the MAC team made a New Year's Six, whatever. I think that's important to look at too. But I think right now, I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I would agree too because the geography for I mean at least Western Kentucky being the closest bowl closest reasonable bowl eligible Conference USA team because I don't think Liberty would be going to the Bahamas Bowl against a middling MAC team with the way things are going. That team looks like a 13-0 team that will probably I don't know, maybe you'll see Toledo versus Liberty 2.0, which I don't know if the Bulls would
That'd be
want that,
fun.
but it would be fun. I know ESPN would probably want that, but I'm not sure if the fans of both schools would want that. Um, but I mean, yeah, like I do agree. Like, I mean, I thought like, of course, in my head that Conference USA had more of a Southern skew, but of course, like Conference USA is all over the place, and the only
Hmm.
reasonable team would be Western Kentucky, and that's 7 hours away. The same amount of time that Charlotte is from Miami of Ohio. So
Hmm.
maybe like you say, like there isn't too much of an advantage. But in my opinion too, like because ESPN like I don't think they care as much for in-person attendance with some of the bowl games they own. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the first responder bowl. Like that might have been the most random. I mean, I guess for like many years now, that's like the most random like group of 5 bowl pairing. I know one year is like Western Kentucky, Western Michigan in Dallas, and it's like okay, obviously like
Yeah.
in-person attendance won't be strong there, and like last year's Utah State Memphis. But yeah, like that being said, I would think that with the opportunity to sell a bowl trip to Sunbelt schools within the Carolinas region, I feel like that's too good of opportunity for them to pass up. But I
Right.
guess I'm not really sure like who runs I guess who's on the bowl committee for the Bahamas Bowl itself, whether it's like people organic to the island or whether it's ESPN suits. So I guess that's also another factor that plays into it.
Well, and I think that there is a pecking order. I know the Mid American Conference, based off of stuff I've learned and stuff I've talked to different people about, they kind of get a say on which teams go where. Um, so it's kind of hey, these teams are eligible. Um, and it all comes down to the matchups, right? The bowl committees sit down with the conferences and say, hey, we'd like to, or I think they sit down with the schools and say, hey, we'd like to invite you to our bowl game. Um, and I think the bowl committee, they've got their algorithms. They know how they're looking at everything and how they're figuring it out. So they know exactly what they want when it comes to a bowl pairing. They look for an obscure storyline or, hey, so and so's dad played at this school, and now he's starting for the team they're playing against. Whatever it may be. So they always look for that obscurity. But I think also you talk about um, putting the Sun Belt in. Right now, 2 of the guaranteed bowl games for the Mid American Conference, the Lending Tree Bowl and the Camellia Bowl, at least one of those is a Sun Belt guarantee. The other one is an AAC or Sun Belt guarantee. So you're getting two matchups there. I didn't look at the Sun Belt matchups in terms of bowl games and where they sit with their tie-ins, but I think if you're talking about quality group of five versus group of five matchups, I think you got to continue to kind of stick to the status quo, right? It's not like the Rose Bowl during the BCS era where it was like, all right, we don't necessarily need to send a Big Ten team there. We don't need to have a Pac-12. I mean, we saw Texas versus Michigan in the 2004 Rose Bowl. That broke a mold. That broke a long-standing tradition of the Pac-10 versus the Big Ten. And I think that as college football continues to evolve and continues to change the landscape of what it is, we're going to see that more and more often.
Yeah, I would agree. And I guess on your last point too, I think the MAC does a good job of like having really set conference matchups with their bowl games. Cause like off the top of my head, just thinking about like I guess in particular, in this age where the Rose Bowl isn't really the Rose Bowl that we know of and it won't be going forward, where you have those Mountain West versus MAC matchups in the Potato Bowl, in the Arizona Bowl, where it feels like a pseudo Rose Bowl, a term that oddly enough, my friend and I have used for years, a Foes Bowl. Shout out Marshall, which I mean, one of the things on my wall is a 2019 pennant for when Harvard commemorated their 1920 Rose Bowl team, which was
I love
a
that.
Foes Bowl in itself. I mean, the term, I guess a brief tangent. The term was born in 2016 when Penn honored their 1916 Rose Bowl team. They put roses in the end zone of Franklin Field, and I was like, wow, like this is a Foes Bowl. I'm sure I could find the old podcast footage on SoundCloud sometime. I was hoping I'm thinking about re-releasing those periodically during the off season, but
That's cool.
that's neither here nor there. But yeah, like I think that's something the MAC does way better than the other conferences. Because when I look at it, honestly, ESPN controls the bowl season for the group of five. I don't think there's any sugarcoating it because looking at how many group of five bowl times there were before ESPN stepped in and created bowls, it was just a little. It was a small amount of bowl times. I guess like nowadays, like it's hard for me to even like think of a bowl that's not owned, a group of five bowl that's not owned by ESPN. Like, I mean, I can only think of like the Lending Tree Bowl, the New Orleans Bowl, and the Military Bowl, and of course the Arizona Bowl. Like that's it. So
Well, and I think to that point, right? You talk about the ESPN owning bowl games and how that's expanded. I mean, you look at 2000. I'll just use that as an example. The year 2000, Toledo knocked off Penn State. Toledo, I mean, they finished a year. I think they finished 10-2. Didn't win the Mid American Conference. Didn't go to a bowl game. Northern Illinois, I think 2 years later, maybe a year later, finished, I want to say 11-1, didn't win the MAC, didn't go to a bowl game. There was a lot of snub for great teams out of the Mid American Conference, but also, the group of five in general that didn't get opportunities for bowl games. And you're right. People talk about, oh, there's too many bowl games. And it's like, well, no, because I think you weren't giving enough teams who deserve to go to bowl games opportunities. And now maybe there's a little bit of over course correction. I think the playoffs will probably eventually alleviate that as they expand and change that landscape, if you will. But for right now, I think it's a good thing. I mean, the schools, it helps their numbers. It gets these kids an opportunity to play for something at the end of the year, especially in leagues that don't have as much NFL turnover as some of the Power Five leagues, right? If I'm going to tell you Ohio State is going to play Bowling Green in the Quick Lane Bowl, Ohio State's not sending their whole team. Let's call it what it is. They've got too many guys who are prepping for the NFL. So people will be like, oh, Bowling Green won that game. Yes, but there's that caveat. So yes, I realize I'm looking at the New Mexico State poster behind you there with the Bowling Green the game. I was there for that, and that was a heartbreaker for the Mid American Conference. But Jerry Kill does a great job down there at New Mexico State, and he's done a really nice job kind of bringing that program back. I digress. So yeah, I really think that you talk about even the Quick Lane Bowl, that's supposed to be a Big Ten matchup. Well, the Big Ten's like, whatever. We'll send our schools elsewhere. And we get saddled with a great group of five matchup. It was Michigan State versus Nevada, or Western Michigan versus Nevada 2 years ago in a great game. And then last year, New Mexico State versus Bowling Green. Those aren't Power Five programs playing in that game. That's the MAC versus a fellow G5. But I think they make for great games too. And I think that's the other part of it. The Big Ten hasn't played in that bowl game, I want to say, since 2018. We saw Eastern Michigan play Pitt back in 2019. So it's really interesting how these things come across and how they all kind of come full circle when it comes to these bowl games and who really gets what. Because the only thing that ESPN really cares about, and I hate saying it, is the playoffs anymore. That's where their focus is. So they don't care who goes to what bowl games. Our focus is the 4 soon to be 12 team playoff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you made a couple great points to segue off, but I mean, first, I just want to talk about your last point about ESPN only caring about the playoff, where it's like, I can think of the five most memorable like bowl moments in terms of, I guess, like emotion and honestly just like the spirit of bowl season. They're
Mhm.
not in New Year's Six bowls or playoff bowls. Like when I think about bowl season, I think about like Chad Lunsford dropping to his knees, or I guess not dropping to his knees. I think he dropped to his knees, but I mean, it was just having an emotional, just like
Yeah,
outpouring after the game-winning field goal against Eastern Michigan. Sorry, that's like the first thing that came to
it's
mind.
it's
Yeah,
those moments.
yeah, in those bowl games. So I mean, it's sad that that's the way it is. But also you mentioned the Power Five part of that where um I wrote a AAC preview for As for Football. Well, I finished it up and I mentioned how the Fenway Bowl might benefit in the end by not having Tulane play in that game.
Mhm.
Because the Americans' approach is we're going to send our best bowl teams to, play the Power Five because we're going to show them we're the Power Six, which I mean, in a way, I respect, but other times it just leads to bowl games that are just an immense waste of time. And like I mentioned in that preview, how we could have a situation like the 2020 Birmingham Bowl, where it's like I remember that bowl game. I just remember being just an immense waste of time that I just sat and watched because I just love bowl games, and it was like a show of loyalty. But I guess I want to ask, like, should Toledo go 12-1 or Miami of Ohio go 11-2 and win the conference and I guess the Bahamas Bowl chooses to go with the Sun Belt team and it opens up a spot against the Power Five, whether it be a 6-6 team or a 7-5 team. I guess I guess what would your thoughts be on that if that scenario played out?
That scenario played out, I think it would be highly beneficial for the Mid American Conference. One, you now get a premier opponent on national television versus your conference champion. That's always a benefit to winning the conference championship, the opportunity to go play a premier opponent. I think it won't shape out that way. Back in 2017, we saw an 11-2 Toledo play Appalachian State in the Dollar General Bowl. I don't think that the committees will value Toledo or Miami uh, winning the MAC as highly as they might have back in 2003 when Miami rose all the way to number 10 in the rankings in the country. But I do think that there is some value to finishing 12-1. 12-1 would be Toledo's best season since the 80s. Um, it would be their longest win streak since the 1969 to 1971 35-0 team. So there's a little bit of a MAC history there for you. But I think if you really look at it, I don't I don't think the MAC would ever say no to the opportunity to send their best team to go play a higher tier bowl game or a more prestigious bowl game just because it's a Power Five opponent. In fact, I think they would very much embrace that and welcome that opportunity to play on a much more national stage. Because aside from a few diehards, who tunes into the Bahamas Bowl versus, I don't know, let's say the Gator Bowl, right? You look at it. If Toledo got to go and play the SEC in the Gator Bowl, or Miami got to go play, the Big Ten in a Gator Bowl, you better believe more people are going to be watching that game than they are Western Kentucky taking on Central Michigan in the Bahamas Bowl. Let's just call it what it is. So that's really what I think. The MAC would be foolish, I think, to say no to an opportunity to play a premier opponent in a slightly better bowl game.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And I mean, I hope that it would play out that way where I guess 12 win Toledo team or even 11 win Miami team gets a shot at a Power Five team. And there's a few bowls that where there is a pathway where the ACC sends its dregs to like the Birmingham Bowl,
Hmm.
or I think like another one's like the Gasparilla Bowl in some years, even though that might change with it now being at a larger venue. But I would love to see it happen, honestly. I mean, I guess a win over a Power Five is a win over a Power Five, whether or not it's debatable they want it to be there. I mean,
Yep.
that discourse is always fun, and it always
I,
comes up
I
in
I
games.
will say that was my big gripe with people talking about what Auburn UCF a few years ago. I'm sorry. That Auburn team did not send everybody to the NFL. Some of those guys, it was their very last time playing football ever. So, people and fans can say all they want. Oh, they didn't want to be there. They didn't really care. No. Some of those guys, that was the last time they were putting on a football uniform and playing for something that they wanted to go out with a win. Nobody ever wants to go out with a loss. No athlete ever shows up to a game and says, it's fine if I lose, especially their last game. You talk about seniors in high school who know that they won't play the college level, who get emotional over their final game with a loss. Like they didn't go to the playoffs. They didn't go to, so you see them emotional over a loss. It's the same thing with these college guys, right? They understand this is my last chance to play this game that I've poured my heart and soul into for the last 23 years. I want to go out with a victory because who wants to be okay with a loss? So that whole dialogue, that is fans talking because they're mad about, you know, a small school getting a win. No, it's a false narrative. You talk to players, none of them ever want to go out with a loss.
Yeah, I would agree, honestly. And I think that's well put. So I mean, no matter what happens on December 18th, in the Bahamas or in Charlotte, I know both teams will want to be there, going to the Queen City, which I mean, heck, that's an opportunity to visit the NASCAR museum. I don't even watch NASCAR. I went to the museum when I was stationed in Georgia. I had a blast. I thought it was a great
Sure.
museum. So with that being said, I mean it'll be a great time either way, and people will still tune in. I mean as a lead into Monday Night Football, which they got the time slot change, which I think is a big win for the MAC in general. I mean just getting
Hmm.
that because the 11 a.m. ratings on a Saturday or not, it's not great, especially last year's Bahamas. I remember it's funny because I remember watching the Bahamas Bowl since it was on a Friday. Start the bowl season, and I'm in El Paso. I showed up to work and I just started watching the Bahamas Bowl like while I was working at my desk. It was
Sure.
a weird feeling. It was a very weird feeling at 9 in the morning to have a live bowl game on, but I mean that's where we were. So
Miami was 6 yards short of that win. That was a rough one.
that's another memorable bowl moment that I just like think
Yeah.
of. Just like it's like call it the Walmart or the Great Value version of a Super Bowl. I think it's like 33 with like Steve McNair and the Rams, but like it was an amazing finish to like a bowl, just a bowl game. I mean, so
Yeah.
you can't ask for more than that. Hopefully this year's Bahamas Bowl replicates that. But
Yeah, that'd be
that's
great.
yeah, absolutely. That's all I had for this discussion, Alex. Do you have anything final? I know you have a lot to plug. I know the CSC podcast is up to a lot of great work this year. So if you want to plug that, just go ahead.
No, I appreciate it. First off, thank you so much for having me on to kind of talk through this bowl game uh dilemma, if you will. So big thank you to you and all the work you do. I love reading your articles, love it when I get the opportunity to chime in and just kind of throw out some stuff. And I mean, you're always very well researched, and so hats off to you for all the great work you
Thank you.
do. But the CSC podcast, all action all the time. Pretty self-explanatory. It's we cover the best little conference in the Midwest, and we take care of these schools. Like I said, I've been traveling to all 12 max stadiums this year. That has been my goal, and I am almost done. Hard to believe, like I said, but a little bit more than that. We don't just cover football, we don't just cover basketball. uh if you're a fan of a sport that, maybe people don't talk about, I'm covering women's field hockey championships this weekend, um, down in Oxford, Ohio. So we try to cover and give an opportunity for every program, every sport, every athlete to have the spotlight. So you can find us on Twitter X at College Sport Pod, Instagram at the CSC Podcast. And then obviously wherever podcasts are, we appreciate the love and support there. Been building a mobile app as well. This has been a project I've been it took off over the summer pretty heavily, and then um as football season kind of got into play, like my work on it kind of slowed a little bit, but it's in beta right now for Apple users to download, check out, whatever. So if you want it, please shoot us a message, say, hey, let me get that beta link, I'll get you taken care of. But it's going to be really cool, and I'm really excited for the development of that app. And yeah, I mean, like I said, just appreciative of opportunities to talk about this conference, talked about this league, and yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for taking time, especially a time late on a central time zone night. It's always difficult coordinating out here from the mountain time zone because there's not a lot of people I talk to westward of me. But yeah, I mean, I just can't wait for all the great things. And if you would like, I can put the link to the beta in the description of this podcast.
Cool.
If you give me that after, but thanks again, Alex. I mean, just very excited for bowl season. I mean, in general, Mac as well. But until next time, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated. Until next time, everyone, peace on the soul.